I'm Brendan McGivney of Odell Brewing Company, and this is the Brewer to Brewer podcast from All About Beer. My guest is Jason Perkins of Allagash Brewing, and he's here for a conversation that goes beyond the brew house and into topics that matter to brewing professionals and curious beer drinkers. First, please visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media at All About Beer. And to support journalism in the beer space, check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. We'll get into the conversation in just a moment, but first, this message.
First Tee is a proud sponsor of the Brewer to Brewer podcast. Some of the brightest brewers across the country have discovered the First Tee advantage. Hill Farmstead, Sweetwater Brewing Company, and Angry Chair are among the many who have used First Tee's unique and quality teas and botanicals to create top-rate beers. First Tee focuses on being direct, flexible, and fast. You can find out more about First Tee's collaboration with brewers and tea ingredients by visiting firsttee.com/blog. That's FIRSDTEA.com/blog.
All About Beer is back, and we're asking for your support to help provide the independent beer media this rich and colorful industry deserves. Visit our website, allaboutbeer.com, where we're frequently posting new content. And please consider throwing us a few bucks at patreon.com/allaboutbeer. We have low-cost memberships for individuals and small and large companies alike. Every dollar goes to help produce new articles and podcasts.
Looking for an easy hop sourcing experience? Yakima Valley Hops offers the finest quality hops from right here in our valley and premium growing regions around the world. Get the hops you need when you need them with ultra-fast shipping and awesome customer service. With a full line of liquid hop products and all your favorite varieties, no contracts are needed to brew with the best. Shop now at yakimavalleyhops.com. That's YAKIMA valleyhops.com.
All right. Okay, let's get into it. A bit about my guest today. Jason Perkins is the brewmaster and vice president of brewing operations at Allagash. Jason has been part of Allagash since 1999. He currently sits on the board of the Brewers Association, American Malt and Barley Association, and Allagash Wilderness Waterway Foundation, and is actively involved with the Hop Quality Group. He's the chairman of the Brewers Association Technical Committee, a former board member of the Master Brewers Association of the Americas, New England, as well as the Maine Brewers Guild, and is the recipient of the 2016 Russell Shearer Award for Innovation in Craft Brewing. When Jason is not working, he enjoys hanging with his family, exploring the many beautiful wild places in Maine, and playing ice hockey. He lives in North Yarmouth, Maine, with his wife, Julie, and 2 children. Did I say Yarmouth properly, Jason?
You did. Most people say Yarmouth.
Yarmouth.
So yes, you got it.
You want to get your beer?
Yeah. I figured, I can't have a conversation with a friend without a beer.
I love it.
I'm having, you remember these things? Remember these like hard amber looking things that hold beer?
Yeah, we have a couple of those left.
You can't see us. I figured I'd try a drink out of a bottle for old time's sake.
Nice. Love it. All right. Now that you got a beer, Jason, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to chat with me today. I know I'm not alone when I say I have a tremendous amount of respect for what you've done and continue to do for craft beer. You're a true leader, both technically and culturally. Your expertise as a brewmaster is well known through the quality of your beer and your approach to innovation. Furthermore, you're quick to geek out with other brewers and you offer your insight to help others on their brewing journey. That being said, I'd like to touch base on your approach to team building. As an ice hockey player, it takes more than one person to make a successful team. And we often talk about cultural similarities at Allagash and Odell Brewing regarding culture. I was hoping you could maybe speak to the importance of team dynamics and how you've built that into the success of Allagash.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, first of all, I'll say totally honored when I heard you asked me to join. It's a pretty huge list of people you could have asked instead of me. So I'm super honored that you chose me. But so thank you for letting me join this fun little chain letter of sorts. But yeah, and I, as you noted, you and I have chatted a bunch of times over the years of the kind of similarities in our 2 breweries and our organizations in terms of how we approach lots of things, beer quality, and people for sure.
Mhm.
And so you've always been a great person to bounce thoughts off of and ideas off of. So, but in terms of team building, I mean, it's incredibly important. It's as important as anything to us here, is keeping the team cohesive, keeping the team connected, understanding what the motivations of the company are, what's important here, getting feedback from the team. It's not like, it's not like it's no one thing that makes that all work, and because I've been here so long, and when I started here, we were so small. It's like almost as we've grown, we had to continue to evolve the way we, work with team building. I mean, there was a time that doesn't seem all that long ago that we'd all work the bottling line together for the day. Sometimes that day would be 6 hours. Sometimes it would be 14 or 15. And then we all ended at the same time. We all sat down and had a beer. And that was the company meeting, and that's probably the way it is at lots of breweries across the country. Well, as you grow, those opportunities become harder and harder to find. And I remember some pretty distinct moments in our growth where we're like, wow, we're just not able to connect with the team the way we used to connect with the team, because those moments aren't there anymore. And then you just have to work harder to find new ways to communicate, find new ways to get input from team members, and so on. And that's, I think, something we've not always been good at, because sometimes there are moments you're like, well, we're really not doing that very well. We're not communicating to the team as well as we should. And then you figure out a new way to do it. And, one thing I've learned on the communication side is it's not up to me what the best communication is. Like, I may think, oh, wait a minute, we're communicating in this way and that way. And it doesn't matter. If the people receiving the information don't feel like it's being delivered to them in the right way, then we need to change it. So I guess the best way, to continue to evolve is you just have to keep changing and finding new ways to connect with the team. But we very much value the two-way communication. Like, we want the team to know what the priorities are for the brewery, but I want to hear, we have so many talented people here in the team that I want to know what they think the new and better way to do things here is.
Yeah, you've done an amazing job cultivating that talented team. I mean, you've had some longtime folks there, that are really smart people like yourself, and they're dedicated to what you're trying to do it at Allagash. But that change management, I mean, we've been on both sides of it. Like you mentioned, there was a time where, when I started here in '95, there were only 3 of us, in production, and you ripped out some beer, and then you hung out and had some beers, and then you went out and tried to sell some beers. And it was a fun time. It was very entrepreneurial spirit. And then all of a sudden we found ourselves at, 175 people, and it's a very different structure and very different system. Of course, we've added a couple of facilities, one including a restaurant, which makes things really complex. But that change management is something that's always a challenge, whether you're growing or shrinking down a little bit to get more efficient. Can you maybe talk about how you guys handle that, or what you've learned from change management? Because it's so different for every coworker. We always kind of struggle with making sure we're hitting each kind of learner or each kind of personality to make sure we are connecting, because that communication, like you mentioned, it may work great for you or I to get it by email, because that's the way we operate or something, but someone else may need a face-to-face conversation to really hear you, and maybe not in a group setting. So then you're having one-on-ones. But that's one thing we have not really figured out, the kind of golden goose, how to do that just the right way. I don't know if you guys have some strategies you could share, because all brewers are going through change, whether you're getting bigger or getting smaller, or faced with challenges in the industry. It's change management is ever present when you're running a brewery.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, and we have not figured it out either, for sure. I mean, it's kind of one of those things. I think if we attack it in a way that, with a mindset that we will figure it out, then we're just gonna, just be beating our heads against the wall, because you have to continue. That's the whole thing with change, right? You have to continue to change the way anything we're doing here, and certainly on the way we communicate with the team. We have different personalities come and go. New people come to the team. People have been here a long time, and you have to recognize that everybody listens and hears things in a very different way. And it also is widely varying, as you referenced, depending on what the state of the company is. Like, to some degree, when we've had, just like you have, we've had some crazy years of growth, where you're growing at these huge growth rates. And I mean, this is going to sound weird, but like, I don't really actually like that. I mean, I think some people would say that's great. We're making more beer, we're making more money, but it's tough to manage when you're growing at a super high growth rate. It's really hard to keep in kind of in tune with those changes, especially around personnel. Getting people hired the right way, getting people trained the right way, making sure they understand what's going on. You're basically just like holding on to the reins, just cranking that beer out. And, I would also say that, shrinking brings its own levels, bits of challenges where you're making less beer than you did the year before. So, a little bit of growth is always the right thing, right? And your approaches to managing a team are going to be widely variant depending on which of those scenarios that you're in.
Yeah, it's interesting. Right now, we're shrinking a little bit after having grown. We were growing 12% a year for a decade, right? And there were some years that were, 25%, and we're still just a regional independent craft brewer. And that was crazy. It's like we look at it now as we're trying to get tighter and more efficient and shrinking a little. As those were like the glory days, right? Oh, remember we were growing that, but it was brutal. I think we forget that, you're working ungodly hours and safety wasn't always the primary objective of the day. I mean, just going back to, it's embarrassing and awful to say, but thinking about the things we used to do as startup brewers, growing really quickly, it's like that. Of course, you cared about safety of yourselves and coworkers, but man, you had to just, like you said, hang on, because the volume demands were so great that you didn't want to miss an order, and you got to keep an eye on quality, train people up. And it was insane growing like that. But this shrinking is a different challenge. And fortunately, we've been here before in terms of volume. So we have some systems and structures in place that we can look back upon, but that change management is no different. It's still extremely difficult. And like you said, there are different challenges when you're shrinking a little, and there's different challenges when you're growing a lot, but they're all challenges.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of referenced it with safety, but one of the things when you're growing at super high rate, one of the things I think it took me a while to understand what it was that made me uncomfortable about it. And that was, you don't have time to do things the right way, right? Yeah. Whether it's safety, I mean, you do everything you can to be safe, everything you can to keep quality up. But the reality is, especially when it comes to something like efficiencies, safety should be number one all the time, of course, and then quality second to that. But efficiency is one of these things that, especially when you just don't even think about it. You're like, just get it out, get it done. And one thing I like about, less growth is the ability to really, it's kind of one of my favorite things to do, to figure out how to optimize, how to get better at what you're doing in all aspects of the business, which is beneficial for everybody, whether that's reducing loss or, working on TPOs or any of those things that just improve overall life at the brewery. When you're growing at that 20% growth rate, you don't have the ability to look at that stuff. You're just focused on the speed of things. And so, yeah.
How do you guys approach process improvement at the brewery? Do you have a specified team that works on it, or is it a collaborative effort? Is it just you coming down and saying, hey, we're gonna try this, let's see how it worked?
Yeah, I mean, I try to set overarching goals for the team of things that we're trying to look at. But those are pretty broad overarching goals. Like, look, we can identify that this particular beer has a higher loss rate than another, and let's figure it out. Or, let's try to reduce water usage in this area by X%. But, I'm not best suited to dictate how that's done. I'm not working day to day in those areas anymore. And so, and you mentioned earlier that we've got a really tenured team here. We're super fortunate. I mean, the folks, who lead specific areas here. So, like Branch, who leads our brewhouse area, he's been here for approaching 15 years. And Greg, our senior production leader, has been here for more than 15 years. So we have a bunch of people in those areas who have tremendous experience in each of those areas. And so they'll lead it. But then again, the team below them is also super talented. So
Right.
I honestly try to stay out of the way, other than saying these are areas we want to work on, and letting them kind of take it from there. Certainly CO2 use was a great example in the early days of the pandemic where, frankly, we were pretty lazy about it because we could be. CO2 is cheap and in high supply, and then all of a sudden it wasn't cheap and it wasn't in great supply, and it's like, holy cow. And that was kind of a forced efficiency project. It's nice if you don't wait till you're forced to do something, but so that was something to push down to the packaging team, push down to the seller team, and made tremendous work in dialing in and bringing those levels down.
What were some of the areas you attacked with CO2 specifically? Because I know a lot of brewers are struggling with the same thing, including ourselves. We went through a similar process of dramatically reducing our CO2 usage because, like you said, we weren't paying attention. It was really cheap and quite abundant, and then it wasn't.
One of the first things we did, it seems kind of simple, but we just cataloged use. We created a spreadsheet that showed overall usage and then broken down by amount and by percent in every area in the brewery. And some of those values were truly accurate, like values that went through a flow meter somewhere. So we could say for every barrel of beer here, this is how much CO2 is used. Or it was calculated like a purge we could roughly calculate even without a flow meter based on the size of the tank, for example. And then you could, a couple other areas we used manufacturing data from the can line manufacturer to say this is what's used here. And so there was some assumptions made, but in the end, we ended up on a number that accounted for 100% of the CO2 use throughout the brewery. And that was pretty eye-opening to see what the biggest usage areas were. And some were obvious, can line, underlid gas, stuff like that. But to see it in raw data really said, okay, this is obviously where we need to focus on reduction areas. So closer monitoring purge times was a big one. I should back up and go further. We did a full audit of the whole facility with leak tests with a leak detector, and just things like to making sure clamps were tight and all that kind of stuff. And that was hard to quantify how much we saved there, but there was savings there for sure.
Yeah.
And then we've incorporated nitrogen in a ton of areas, mostly around the packaging line, but in some tank purging and tank pushes. Nitrogen is in it's very easy for us to get around here. We have a plant that generates it just about 30-40 miles south of us. So it's pretty cheap and pretty readily available and super high quality. So versus getting a nitrogen generator, which some breweries did, we just put in a bulk tank and get it bulk delivered.
Yeah, that's great. You and I talked about that a little bit. We didn't have the same nitrogen bulk supply nearby. So we went the generator route, and it's helped a lot. But, you mentioned that you have nitrogen locally. That's not the only thing you get locally. Can you maybe speak to some of your raw materials and such that you guys use in the brewing process that's not proprietary or that you're willing to share?
Honestly, not much proprietary here, but we've been buying some level of local ingredients since probably 2006, 2007. But in the early years of doing that, it was mostly fruit. So we have a big, wild and sour beer program here. Not quite as big as it used to be, but it's still a part of what we do here. And so we source all of our local fruit, cherries, raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, etc., from farms in the state, farms pretty close to us. So that kind of was our first dipping our toe into local ingredients. Not long after that, we started using some raw grains from, some oats and some unmalted wheat. But we had up until about 10 or so years ago, there was lots of barley grown in the state, but there was no malt houses here. So there was barley grown in the state, but it was and actually for malting grade, but he's being sent up north to Canada to be malted in Canada and blended into big bins. So there was never any kind of available isolated Maine grown barley. And then the couple malt houses opened in the state, and things really changed pretty quickly here. The same time, some other folks were doing work with just better processing for food, for grain for food use on the unmalted side. There's a long history of small grains growth here in the state. Oats and wheat have been grown here for a very long time, and some barley, but a lot of it was for feed, not necessarily for food of any kind. And so we kind of recognized that around 2016, that there was a huge opportunity. There was a bunch of people growing the grains, but there was also a bunch of land becoming available. Potato farming has historically been something fairly big here in the state. Not as big as Idaho, but still a pretty big crop for us up here in Maine. And that's actually what started barley being grown, was as a rotational crop for potatoes, because potatoes are not good for the land to grow in year after year. So barley was kind of worked in. But potatoes were getting harder and harder for the farmers. They weren't making much money on it, and so they were looking for other opportunities. And we're obviously not the only brewery here in the state of Maine. We got a bunch of them here who are also interested in local agriculture. So things kind of moved along, and we set a project in 2016 to target using 1 million pounds of Maine grown and processed, so malted or dried and bagged, all in the state by 2021. So that was 5 years later at the time. In 2016, I think we were using about 60,000 pounds a year. So it was a pretty lofty, big goal, but we saw promise there for it to change. And we knew that the capacity could be built with planning. So that was kind of part of our promise, if you will, to these farms and malt houses, is we can't buy 1 million pounds a year right now, but in 5 years we want to, and we're going to grow ourselves there. And you build your businesses and your fields around that plan. And then at the same time, there's a bunch of breweries in the state who are using a ton of local grains. Someone like Bissell Brothers here in Portland uses a ton of Maine grown grains as well, as do a bunch of the small breweries. So it's been amazing to see the change here in the state in the last 6 or 7 years in terms of the amount of acres of barley, oats, and wheat that are grown for brewers. The size of these malt houses, both the two malt houses in our state have both expanded multiple times in terms of their capacity. They're still small, but they've been able to invest and hire more people and so on. So it's been super, as you can probably tell by my reaction. It's like one of the coolest things we've got to do in the last 5 years, and something I'm super psyched to talk about.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's how involved are you guys with the malting? Do you get into the malt house and help them with specs or techniques or anything like that, or are you just kind of giving them high level feedback?
Yeah, we definitely give them specs and we talk through their process. But even though they're new they've gotten they had some learning curves in the first couple of years. But there's Blue Ox Malt House and Maine Malt House are the two malt houses in the state, and they both have gotten really good at what they're doing. And so we can we're an important customer to them, and so we can say we need grains that hit these specs, and they can do it. So we don't necessarily get involved with the malt houses, although both do have floor malting operations to some degree. So we get to rake the grain when we go to visit them, just for fun.
That's always a cool photo op.
Yeah, luckily we only do it once for the photo instead of them coming in at 2 a.m. and doing it themselves. So
exactly, it's along the lines of jumping in the hop pile, except a little less itchy.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're been a member of the Hop Quality Group and AMBA. So, and talking about the local agriculture, what do you think brewers can do to help build a long-term sustainable relationship with our agricultural partners the way you guys have in Maine?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you reference those two organizations. I think that's a great start. Both of those organizations are doing tremendous work. I mean, I think you were a founding member, right, of the Hop Quality Group?
Yeah, we got in there early on.
Yeah, we came on a few years later, but just great organization doing great work. And AMBA is American Malting Barley Association on the barley side, also doing tremendous work. And it's hard because membership in those organizations is not something you can come back to an owner and say, there's a clear ROI for this. If you pay these dues, then it'll produce this for us. And so sometimes I think breweries can, especially in tough times that we kind of are in at the moment, sometimes hard to say, this is something we should be a part of. But, Hop Quality Group has tiered membership for brewing sizes, as does AMBA. AMBA has associate memberships as well. So that would be my first thing, is get involved, because those organizations are doing, frankly, like totally thankless, like selfless work for the industry.
Yep.
It's not, there's not a room full of people figuring out how to get the next best hops for themselves, or, get pricing benefit. These are, if people who don't know these organizations, if you could be a fly on the wall and listen to the conversations, it's all about how do we make these crops more resilient for the future? How do we come up with what's best for brewers and so on? So if possible, like, getting involved in those organizations is such a great way to support the ag side of our business.
Yeah, it seems like over the last decade or so, a lot of brewers have direct contact with hop growers, just as as things have developed through selection or what have you, interactions at CBCs or all that stuff. But malting barley seems to be this whole other big thing that is viewed more as a commodity, I think, amongst brewers, particularly smaller brewers that I've talked to. So I'd love to get your thoughts on, like, how can a really small brewer who maybe couldn't be part of this organization understand more of malting barley and what challenges we face ahead?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that malt, barley malt is kind of almost taken for granted, I think, by a lot of people. Consumer side of things, a savvy craft beer consumer could probably name, 10, 15 hop varietals off the top of their head, but probably couldn't begin to tell you maybe even where barley is grown, what parts of the country it's grown in. So it is kind of, which is funny because it's obviously the largest poundage input by far as an ingredient for beer, and is the backbone of all beer, and could not be more important. But I hear you on the small side of things. I mean, I think supporting local growers, I mean, it's not the case in all of the country, but a good chunk of the country, I'm surprised the more and more I hear of places in, like, even places like Texas or Georgia, where I wouldn't have historically thought there'd be local grown barley or wheat available. And now there is. I think you probably don't have to look, maybe not within your own state, but probably most states in the US, you can go a state over, or, a couple hour drive and find a locally grown source of those grains. And I think that's the best way to make a connection with that side of things. Cause it's hard if you're a small brewer to get the attention of one of the big malt houses and be able to get a good tour there and visit the fields and so on. But small farmers and small malt houses love to talk shop, and, being able to go out and see it in the field and potentially see it harvested and go to a malt house, like, just, you can't beat that connection with the farmers and the maltsters.
Yeah, it is cool to see all the smaller operations that have popped up over time in terms of malt houses or local growers. So yeah, thanks for that insight. We're going to take a short break for this message and then come right back for more of the conversation with Jason Perkins of Allagash Brewing.
First Tea is a proud sponsor of the Brewer to Brewer podcast. Some of the brightest brewers across the country have discovered the First Tea advantage. Hill Farmstead, Sweetwater Brewing Company, and Angry Chair are among the many who have used First Tea's unique and quality teas and botanicals to create top-rate beers. First Tea focuses on being direct, flexible, and fast. You can find out more about First Tea's collaboration with brewers and tea ingredients by visiting firsttea.com/blog. That's FIRSDTEA.com/blog.
All About Beer is back, and we're asking for your support to help provide the independent beer media this rich and colorful industry deserves. Visit our website, allaboutbeer.com, where we're frequently posting new content. And please consider throwing us a few bucks at patreon.com/allaboutbeer. We have low-cost memberships for individuals and small and large companies alike. Every dollar goes to help produce new articles and podcasts.
Looking for an easy hop sourcing experience? Yakima Valley Hops offers the finest quality hops from right here in our valley and premium growing regions around the world. Get the hops you need when you need them with ultra-fast shipping and awesome customer service. With a full line of liquid hop products and all your favorite varieties, no contracts are needed to brew with the best. Shop now at yakimavalleyhops.com. That's YAKIMA valleyhops.com.
So Jason, you've been in the craft beer industry nearly as long as I have, about quarter century, right? So what motivates you these days after so many years in the industry?
Oh man, good question. I mean, I couldn't say enough how amazing the industry is and the friends that I've built up. I mean, I'll talk about Allagash specifically in a moment because I've obviously been here for a long time, but just the connections that I've been able to make, and to be able to be a part of such a wonderful industry that I would call people like you and people and other friends who are all across the country, like true friends of mine, who even though I might only see them once a year, it's just such a wonderful community around it. And for the most part, there are exceptions out there, but most craft brewery owners and people who work at craft breweries really care deeply about their people and about doing the right thing. And obviously everybody needs to make money and needs to be a business that can stay in business. But I think you'd be hard pressed to find another industry out there that cared as much about its community and its people. Obviously we've got, as an industry, got work to do, like everybody does, to be better in that regard. But I still think that maybe people don't necessarily know the right thing to do all the time, but they want to do the right thing all the time, which I think is great. And then Allagash, I mean, I've been here for the bulk of my career, with the exception of 2 years at the beginning. And it's been probably similar for you to be part of an organization that has grown over time, cares about its people and cares about growing the right way. We still have one owner here in Rob Todd, who's the original founder, still the owner, still our president, CEO, whatever you want to call him, but still active every day and still a very good friend of mine. And, I see eye to eye with the way he wants to grow. And so I've had kind of no reason to leave. But, more than that, like the people that we have here, I know it's super cliche, but, the people here who work at Allagash are what makes me motivated to come to work and fired up. Is like, even if I'm kind of like, maybe having a rough day or, feeling a little less inspired than I have been in the past, which everybody has those days, you got a staff of people who are so inspired about making beer and coming up with new stuff and new innovations. It's like all of a sudden you kind of wake back up again and realize that, I gotta figure out what made me passionate about it in the first place, because everyone around me is in that way. So yeah, that's probably it in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah, that's why I kind of started. Go ahead.
Don't forget about the beer. The beer is also pretty great. That's probably another reason why I'm still in it.
That's why I started with the team building piece, because I know how important your team is to you and how that does bring you juice. And I find myself in the same boat. I mean, we have a broad portfolio of beers here, so it's kind of always a challenge to do the next R&D and come up with the next thing. And you guys, I'm always envious that you're able to just zero in on this one beautiful brand that's one of my favorite beers and one of a lot of people's favorite beers. But the beer, like you said, it can get tedious at times when I love nothing more than having a beer at the end of the day. I have one every day. But the people, building the teams and working with the folks in the industry that we get to work with, not only on the brewing side, but we get to the raw material side. There's amazing people there too, and our distributor partners and retailers, and it really has been an incredible industry throughout our run. But it's changing rapidly right now, it seems, and it's there are new challenges that are not as gradual as they used to be. Whereas, you'd see a trend kind of developing and you could make some adjustments. And I don't know, maybe you could speak to what it's like being a independent. I mean, there's not a lot of us anymore, honestly, that are 100,000 barrels ish, that are independent, regional or local brewers. What does the future hold for for independent brewers? Do you think there's room for more and more? Do you think we're saturated at this point? Do you think consolidation's inevitable? Just love to hear your take on how the industry's changed and what you see ahead.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt things are definitely changing rapidly and are unpredictable. That's the other thing. Like, I think the whole world got real unpredictable in March of 2020 and we keep waiting for it to get back to some level of unpredictability, but it just doesn't seem to be in the horizon, whether that's in the beer industry or in the society at large. Like, it's just hard to predict what's coming. Like, we joke all the time about what's next, a bunch of locusts. I don't know, right? What the next thing is. It's like, it's hard. It's unbelievable how like one curveball after another. So, the industry is still tremendously fun, but it's harder than it's ever been. Even when we were smaller and struggling for other reasons, it's just running a business in general. And I'm not just saying it's not just beer; it's everybody. I think it's a challenging time for sure. And layer in on top of that the consumer choices for alcoholic beverages seem to be as unpredictable as anything else and constantly changing and so on. So we talk a lot about what's next for, what's the next thing for Allagash, what's the next thing for the industry, and no one has any answers for sure. I think it is, Odell and Allagash and some other breweries are like us that are still independent and still around our size. I think is particularly challenging. We're in a way kind of in this middle ground, right? Of like, we're not super small, which I'm not saying that's easy. Don't get me wrong. That has its own challenges, but you're a little focused on a small local market or whatever. We're competing, if you will. I know there's not as much competition in beer as there is in other industries, but we're still competing with breweries that are 2 times, 5 times, 10 times, 20 times bigger than us. We're in that same kind of competition, and we don't have that scale, but we also don't have the super small, where the, sexy new brewery that's got this, hard to get beer. Like, we're not in that range either. So I think it's particularly challenging for breweries of our size and type. But I still think that there's room for us to continue to thrive, tell our story about who we are, and make sure people understand what's the value in supporting a brewery like Odell. There's a whole list of things we could talk about and reasons for that. I think there's value there. But do I think that a lot more breweries are going to get to roughly the size of Odell and Allagash? No, I don't. I think it's going to be real challenging. Not impossible, but challenging. Do I think there's room for independent craft breweries that are smaller? Absolutely. I think that's very much going to be regionally specific, and in a market, Portland, Maine, for example, maybe not the greatest idea to open another brewery in this market, but in an hour north of here, maybe. I think it's all going to be very community based, and what does the community have, where there's room for it and interest for it, and room for another great community gathering place and a drinking establishment. I think that's going to be very situationally specific.
Yeah, I'm always surprised.
My word for it, because I can't, no one can predict the world right now.
Oh man, I can't believe how often, whether I'm talking to our hop grower friends or dealers or malt house, or I can't tell you how many times in the last 6 months I've said, frankly, I have no idea. Yeah. And I've been forecasting and contracting, into the future for a long time with pretty good certainty. And right now, unpredictable is the perfect word. It's no idea what's going to happen.
I know our listeners can't see, but can you see what this is?
It's a magic 8 ball.
The magic 8 ball. And I jokingly gave these to a bunch of staff. It was during 2020. And that was our running joke. We'd be like, what do we do next? And we'd be like, I don't know. And we'd pick the magic 8 ball up. And so I keep it on my desk as a reminder, but it's totally like, who fucking knows? The magic 8 ball knows as well as anybody else. So
it really is amazing.
Give me a call. I'll give it a shake.
I find it harder and harder to tell our story. And I'll admittedly say I'm nowhere near marketing. That's not my jam at all. But it's people don't know who's who and what you stand for outside of, the immediate community. You talk about the community gathering space. Folks that come visit our breweries understand. They see the charitable work we do in the Odell outreach and the Allagash program. And, our purpose is to build community through beer. That's our whole reason for being, right? But it's hard to communicate with the end consumer. It's harder and harder, it seems, to get to the end consumer to kind of explain why you should support this business when you're making your beverage alcohol decisions, and why it's important to buy local, and why it's important to, support independent businesses. It seemed a lot easier not very long ago to kind of tell your story and get it across. I feel like there's someone somewhere has done a really good job of mixing things up so you can't tell what's what and what's in a beverage and where it comes from.
Yeah, and then you factor in on top of that the unbelievable amount of choices that alcohol drinker has.
Yeah,
when they go to the store, and it's the 10,000 craft breweries that play a role in that for sure. Yeah. But so do all the other choices that consumers have now. Whether that's canned cocktails or seltzers or whatever, it's hard to navigate all those choices, I think.
And you all have stayed laser focused on beer throughout all this change. You didn't jump into the seltzer world. Is that your intent moving forward, is to just continue to get better with what you do so well and focus on that excellence? Or are you also looking at the R&D side and trying to attack that new drinker?
Yeah, we mostly are. This may not be necessarily the best long-term thing, but we're definitely focused on things we're excited to make. And that was always the thing for us with seltzer, is it's not something that excited me. And again, Rob, as the owner here, he's just like, no, that's not something that interests me. I know we could make some money selling these. The margins are good, great, even easy to make, not a lot of investment, but it just didn't feel true to what we wanted to do. But we also recognize that, the drinker's changing. So we're still thinking about other things. We started making a cider in the last 2 years. Right now it's a hard cider that's just sold here at the tasting room only. And still right now we're just doing that with only Maine grown apples and pressed at a local press. So it's still very, very small, and it would be almost impossible to scale it up to a nationwide release and do it the same way.
Right.
We've like you guys, we have a winery. I use my quotes to call it a winery because all we're making right now is cider, and we've dabbled a little bit with a couple other fruited, like a blueberry R&D blueberry wine, R&D like honeyberry wine, stuff like that. But still, it's super small, like only on site at this point. And part of that was dipping our toe in the R&D side of things, and part of it is recognizing that even in our tasting room, which is only a small part of our business, we get people in here all the time, every day, who say, do you have anything else that's not beer? Yeah. Whether that's a gluten issue or just a preference issue or whatever it may be. So that was really our response to that. But our tasting room is a reflection of society. So
our winery is right next door. It's really it's extremely small as well, and it's just part of our community, our outdoor space, and that it's the exact same thing for us. We had enough people asking, what do you have that's gluten-free? What do you have that's not beer? And it's like, and then we had the internal passion for fermentation in general. We have one coworker in particular, you know Matt Bailey, I think. He's our head engineer. He all of a sudden couldn't drink beer. He had a barley allergy that he developed, and here we are. Matt loves beer and is an incredible coworker and a big piece of who we are. And the guy's like, hey, what if we made wine? So we just chased that passion, and it's in fermentation, and we went for it and did a couple things, got a license, and converted the old Tombstone building next door into the tiniest winery you could think of. But it's been a lot of fun, and we're getting grapes from Roy Farms and Gail Goshi and things like that. So, but our biggest seller is a guava spritz, which is nowhere near traditional wine.
Right. Yeah.
But people need options.
Yep.
We understand you can't be everything for everybody, but focusing on what we do best in beer, and then having that little secondary outlet right next door seems to make sense for us. But it's gonna be a challenge moving forward to figure out how we keep people interested in beer.
Yep. Agreed. Well, beer has survived lots of up and downs as a beverage for a very long time. So
Yep.
I'm quite confident that 100 years from now, people will still be drinking flavorful craft beer in some capacity.
Absolutely. And that's one of the benefits. You mentioned Rob didn't want to get into seltzer because he just wasn't into it. That's one of the benefits of being independent, right? Is you can make some of these decisions that keep you true to your purpose and who you are culturally without always chasing kind of the easier buck. So I look at that as a big benefit of staying independent.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear you guys.
I think, to put it bluntly, if we were to be acquired by, a investment firm, a large global business of some type, they'd come in and they'd cut a whole bunch of stuff within the first couple months instantly, because whether it's employee benefits or a philanthropy program or the wild and sour beer program we do next door, like all of those things on a P&L would look bad. So, if all you're looking for is chasing a return on investment, there's a lot of things we do here that don't meet that model.
Right.
At least the direct financial return on investment. I fully believe it has other returns on investment outside of a quarterly dividend. But yeah, for real, that's the nice thing about independence for sure.
Yeah, and like you mentioned earlier, we need to be profitable to do all the cool stuff we want to do, but it's more that blended approach. I mean, we still make that barrel aged freak here too, but I'm sure you guys have noticed that consumer taste has changed pretty dramatically in the fruited sour world. I mean, we couldn't make enough of it for a while, and you guys were known with Cool Ship program for some of the best beers in the world in that arena. Do you see a drop off in the demand for that kind of stuff? Do you see a less interest, more interest? I mean, what are you seeing in Maine?
Yeah, we definitely
beer program.
Definitely see some loss in interest for sure versus kind of the heyday for those wild and funky beers, which might have been like 2010, 2011, 12, something like that. When we'd do a release here and we'd have a line out the door.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. People waiting at 6 a.m. to get a sample, etc. And we saw it starting to drop on the bottle side, even pre-COVID. And so we're kind of monitoring. So we were still making about the same volume of some of these sour funky beers, and we started like, okay, bottles aren't doing as much. And I think that has a lot more to do with consumer choice than it does like necessarily like people don't like that beer as much. I mean, if you think about 10, 15 years ago, if you wanted a flavorful beer, that could be sour, it could be something else, you had choices, but not a lot of choices. Now, if you want a beer that's packed with flavor, aroma, whatever, whether that's a super hoppy New England style IPA or a pastry stout or a kettle sour or a RTD or a canned cocktail, you've got lots of choices. You have so many choices if you're looking for like a strong flavor experience. So I think that's more what it's about, is more about like not necessarily I think, put another way, like supply and demand. Like demand, I think, is still there for that type of beverage, but the supply is just outstripped demand.
Yeah.
But we shifted a bunch of our volume of those beers to kegs around like late 2019, 2020. And then, of course, that was a bad idea because no one wanted kegs anything for a while period of time. But the good news side of things is that we're still making as many varieties of these beers, honestly, even more, but the volume of each bottling run or keg run is smaller. And we've really moved to, instead of shipping out a pallet or 2 pallets of this beer out to our wholesaler network. We'll still do that if there's a demand for it, but we're more focused on selling them on site. So we kind of created this new thing that we have in our wild barrel room called the Seller's Experience, where it's like a sit down tasting. You talk about the beer. You like really truly tell the story, because that's the thing, as you know, like you need for people to appreciate what they're drinking. They need to understand what went into it, and that's a hard thing to explain at shelf. Whereas here on site we can. So our sales of those type of beers on site are doing very well. It's just we're not seeing the sales of them in the marketplace as much as we used to.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take. That makes a lot of sense. The flavor option perspective, because the smoothie sour, the pastry stout, all these the small, even just if you stay within beer, all the little breweries that have come up with these innovative, flavorful offerings that you can really only serve on premise without exploding bottles or cans.
Right.
That fills that niche to some degree. But I know a lot of what you're doing on the sour beer program is kind of steeped in history and your connection to Belgium. And, you were really helpful last year when we took our group on their 5-year trip to Belgium, and put me in touch with some folks, and I appreciate that. But maybe you could speak to that, kind of the roots of what you guys do and your connection to Belgium and how that's a big piece of Allagash.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a piece from the beginning when Rob opened the brewery. He opened the brewery, and Allagash White was the only beer he made, and he really wanted to. He had classic styles like Hoegaarden and Celis White, which was made in Texas. Well, actually, still is made in Texas. But other than that, no one was really making a beer like that in the U.S. And he really wanted to like open up with something that was different than what was available at the time, which the limited craft beer at the time was English style ales mostly in our area. And so he led with that beer. And then I don't know if he at that point would have said, I'll forever be a Belgian inspired brewery, but we kind of built on that from there. Our next beer was a double, Trappist double. Our beer next beer after that was a triple, et cetera. And we kind of really embraced the culture of defined as Belgian style brewing, really from the beginning. And I think that I would guess almost all craft breweries, whether they necessarily realize it or not, take influence from that tradition, most anyway, because a lot of, one of the things I love about the Belgian brewing is the kind of the spirit of innovation, the spirit of using different ingredients and different styles. And yes, there's classic styles of beer like a white beer or a triple, but there's also Orval, for example, which is just Orval. It's not no one says what beer style Orval is. It's just Orval, right? So there's this tradition of just outside the box brewing. So that's kind of been part of our philosophy of beer making from the beginning, really, and still to this day. And yes, we make a American style IPA now, but we still, our process of coming up with new beers is very much we don't have a box to live in. Everything's wide open, and we really appreciate that side of things. And then, as we grew, we were looking for fun ways to reward employees and connect with employees. And we flat out stole the idea from New Belgium Brewing, that because they were taking employees who had been at the brewery for 5 years. And we basically said, that's a great idea. Let's copy that. Such a great company and cool idea. So we started, I think, I'm trying to remember the first year. I think it was like 2009, maybe was the first year we did a trip. And it was 2 employees, myself and Rob, and 2 employees. And then every year we've done it since. And some trips have been so if you're at the company, regardless of role, after 5 years, you get to go on this trip. And some year, I think the biggest year we had was like 18. So it kind of coincides with how heavily we hired 5 years prior and whether or not those people are still with us or not. And we just go over and tour breweries and eat Belgian food and drink Belgian beer and see sites. And it's been our tradition here that, Rob and I go on every trip. He calls me dad because I'm like the planner. I'm the one who's like, where we're going next. And I have all the money and so on and so forth. So I'm like the tour guide. But when I stop and think about it, it's frankly, from my perspective, it's kind of ridiculous that I get to do this every year. Like when I tell people outside of the industry that I go to Belgium every year and drink beer and with my coworkers for basically a week. It's like stupid. It's stupid that I get to do this. It's like so fortunate. But the other thing it's become such a great part of our culture here, where people we have 4 new employees starting today. Actually, I just met them earlier, and my guess is if they haven't already, they will in the next few months talk about when they go to Belgium, and we'll go to Belgium together because we started together, and it becomes this kind of thing. And we go to some different places every year, but we go to some similar places every year. So when people are getting ready to go, they're like, "Oh, you're going to love here." And then they come back and they get to say, "Oh, did you go here?" Like, and then, packaging people being in the bond with sales team versus engineering team, like just a collecting group. It's just truly amazing part of what we get to do here.
Yeah, that's great stuff, man. I was fortunate enough. My wife worked at New Belgium for years, so I got to go. I think it was 2000. Went to the Belgium trip with New Belgium. Peter had just started at Peter Brewcar just started at New Belgium, so we got an amazing tour of Orval at Didala, and it was incredible.
Yeah.
But every time I get to go there, it's invigorating. It's reinvigorating to see that these breweries aren't heavy growth engine type breweries. It is about innovation and the local culture and community, and they're just doing such cool stuff. Some of it's traditional, some of it's not. I love geeking out with the brewers over there. It's a special opportunity. I'm psyched you guys still get to do that as a company, and that has such an impact.
Yeah, one other thing I'll just say that's been interesting to see over the years of us going there is like, we as breweries at Allagash and so many other American breweries draw this inspiration from these Belgian brewers who've been, whether they've been doing it for, generations or just a short period of time. But now you see when you go back there now, you see like beer styles like kettle sours and New England style IPAs being made by Belgian breweries, which is kind of fascinating, where it's not necessarily come full circle, but they draw a ton of inspiration from craft beer in the U.S. and the growth and the interest level in craft beer in the U.S. is actually quite a bit higher than it is in Belgium. Like there's not like a craft beer following in there as there is here, ironically.
Right. It's a trip, isn't it, to think like here we are, these like startup scrappy craft brewers in the U.S. and we have an influence over such a historic, traditional, incredible brewing community. Like, oh wow! I mean, I saw Simcoe IPAs in Germany. Like wow, that's incredible. We were pilot brewing with some of the first Simcoes.
Totally.
It's a trip. Well, man, I want to thank you for being such a strong leader in the industry. Again, really appreciate the time today. I know it's not, you're a busy man with all the things you do, both at work and outside of work. You've contributed so much. You're one of the most respected people in the business. And again, I truly want to thank you for taking this time. And then for those who don't know, Jason might just be the best men's league hockey player in craft brewing.
That is most definitely not true. I do love a good game of hockey, and the last couple, I'm sorry you missed it in at the CBC this year, but we'll be back. And if you're able to go to Vegas next year, we're already trying to sort a location for the Brewers hockey.
Oh, count me in.
I did that on a whim when we were in Minneapolis, but it's so much fun. You were there. It was so much fun.
That was a blast.
Yeah.
So that was the best part of the CBC for me.
Yeah.
Right on, man. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate it, and look forward to catching up with you soon.
All right. Take care, man.
Cheers.
See ya.
First Tee is a proud sponsor of the Brewer to Brewer podcast. Some of the brightest brewers across the country have discovered the First Tee advantage. Hill Farmstead, Sweetwater Brewing Company, and Angry Chair are among the many who have used First Tee's unique and quality teas and botanicals to create top-rate beers. First Tee focuses on being direct, flexible, and fast. You can find out more about First Tee's collaboration with brewers and tea ingredients by visiting firstte.com/blog. That's FIRSDTEA.com/blog. Looking for an easy hop sourcing experience? Yakima Valley Hops offers the finest quality hops from right here in our valley and premium growing regions around the world. Get the hops you need when you need them with ultra-fast shipping and awesome customer service. With a full line of liquid hop products and all your favorite varieties, no contracts are needed to brew with the best. Shop now at yakimavalleyhops.com. That's YAKIMA valleyhops.com.